Welcome to part 2 of Scary Stories. Today we're going to be reading 3 stories. Let's start with number 1. The Thing. A boy named Ted Martin and Sam Miller, they were good friends. They spent a lot of time together, but on this particular night, they were sitting on a fence near the post office, just talking about one thing and another. There was a field of turnips across the road. Suddenly they saw something crawl out of the field and then stand up. It looked like a man, but in the dark it was hard to tell for sure, but then it was gone. But soon it appeared again and walked halfway across the road. When it turned around and went back into the field. When it came out the third time and started walking toward them, by now Sam and Ted were scared, and they started running. But when they finally stopped, they decided they were being foolish. They weren't sure what had scared them, so they decided to go back and get a better look. Pretty soon they saw it. It was coming to meet them. It was wearing black pants, a white shirt, and black suspenders. Sam said, "I'm going to try to touch it. Then we'll know if it's real." He walked up to it and peered into its face. It had bright, penetrating eyes sunk deep in its head. It looked like a skeleton. Then Ted looked and screamed. And again, he and Sam ran, but this time the skeleton followed them. When they got to Ted's house, they stood in the doorway and watched it. It stayed out in the road for a while, then it disappeared. Later, Ted got sick and died. Toward the end, Sam sat up with him every night. The night Ted died, Sam said he looked just like a skeleton. Story number 2. Cold as Clay. A farmer had a daughter whom cared more than anything on earth. She fell in love with a farmhand named Jim, but the farmer did not think Jim was a good enough boyfriend for his daughter. To keep them apart, he sent her to live with her uncle on the other side of the country. Soon after she left, Jim got sick, and he wasted away and died. Everyone say he died of a broken heart. The farmer felt so guilty about Jim's death. He could not tell his daughter what had happened. She continued to think about Jim and the life they might have had together. One night, many weeks later, there was a knock on her uncle's door. When the girl opened the door, Jim was standing there. "Your father asked me to get you," he said. "I came on his best horse." "Is anything wrong?" she said. "No," she said. "I don't know," he said. She packed a few things and they left. She rode behind him, clinging on to his waist. Soon he complained of a headache. "It aches so terrible," he told her. She put her hands on his forehead. "Why are you as cold as clay?" she said. I hope you're not ill. And she wrapped her handkerchief up around his head. They traveled so swiftly that in a few hours they reached the farm. The girl quickly dismounted and knocked on the door. His father was startled to see her. "Didn't you send for me?" she asked. "No, I didn't," he said. She turned to Jim, but he was gone, and so was the horse. They went to the stable to look for them. The horse was there. It was covered with a sweat and trembling with fear, but there was no sign of Jim. Terrified, his father told her the truth about Jim's death. Then quickly he went to see Jim's parents. They decided to open up his grave. His corpse was in its coffin, but around the head found the girl's handkerchief. Here is another story. The last story, called The Haunted House. One time a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they also would get scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house, went on in, built himself a good fire, and lit a lamp, sat there reading the Bible. Then just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth. Then it sounded like somebody was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again. Before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching, and watching the door to the cellar. And the footsteps kept coming closer and closer and closer. Then he saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy, like there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible to read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to the mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again, and step up the stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn, and the door opened. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed, like he didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out. The old preacher waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see it though. So he turned his chair to where he could watch. He sat down and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again. Slowly, step, 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 closer and closer, step, step. And it was right at the door. The preacher stood up, held his Bible out before the haunting could get him. Then the knob slowly turned, and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quiet, like he said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you, and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman, about 20 years old. Her hair was torn, tangled, and the flesh was dropping off her face, so he could see the bones and parts of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was a sort of blue light way back the eye sockets, and she had no nose to her face.